November 29th, 2022 meeting of the Fitchburg Historical Commission. I now bring this meeting to order. Please be advised that FATV is conducting an audio and video recording of this meeting for public broadcast. I ask that anyone else in the audience who is recording this meeting to please identify themselves for the record now by standing and stating their name and address. I see none. Just a quick roll call. My name is Keith Finot. I'm chair of the Fitchburg Historical Commission.
My name's Ellen DiGeronimo, and I'm a member of the Fitchburg Historical Commission.
Megan Donahue, and I'm a member of the Fitchburg Historical Commission.
Andy Lepasti, Secretary of the Fitchburg Historical Commission.
And remotely, Sam?
Yes, also present.
Sam Blair. Thank you, Sam. Thanks for joining us. At this time, I'd like to commence our public hearing on the Fitchburg Public Libraries. This is by the City of Fitchburg Board of Library Trustees, application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Monument Park Local Historic District for proposed partial demolition, renovations, and expansions to their facility at 610 Main Street, Fitchburg, Massachusetts. At this time, we'd like any representatives, perhaps Matt Sturz, project manager, if you would introduce yourself and state about the project.
Bring this up just a skosh. Can you all hear me okay? First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the commission for the opportunity to present this project to you today. Matt Sturz, project manager for Colliers. We're the owner's project manager, working on behalf of the city of Fitchburg. And just want to sort of say a brief couple of words of introduction. I'm sure that there's plenty in Tappé's presentation today that we'll want to discuss at length, so I'll keep this brief. But this is a follow-on to previously when our project team came before the commission to present the project to you in an informal capacity and gather feedback from the commission. And we have since taken that and incorporated that feedback into the design as it has evolved. We'll hear from Tappé about some of the specifics of those changes today in their presentation. And I want to I guess, yield the floor to Tappé to take us through those changes. But happy to be back here. Thank you very much for having us. And I'll turn it over to Jeff to take us through.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you all members of the commission. I presume that you are hearing me okay?
Yes.
Good. Yes, we can.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the informational meeting we had a couple of weeks ago, and also for then subsequently meeting on site at the library to walk through the various spaces and also the various issues the commission has for the project going forward. I think we've incorporated a lot of the feedback and commentary into our approach for the project, and I have a presentation that I'd like to walk us through to show our overall approach and also get into the weeds on some of the particulars and details of how we see the project coming forward. So if I can, I'd like to share my screen now.
Very good.
And presume that that's working. So I begin with an image of the library that was here before the one that is present currently, the previous Wallace Library and Art Building, as it was called. And this is partly because we think of the project together with being a evolving into becoming a 21st century library facility for the citizens of Fitchburg and the library's service population, we really think about continuing the history that begins with, really begins with the Wallace Building. There are a handful of project goals that we have distilled from the Commission's guidelines that we feel really have already been resonating with our approach to the project. So I'm just going to go through these briefly and then get into the images of the project. First and foremost, I think, is perhaps the preserve and protect the distinctive characteristics of the Fitchburg Library as a place of historical significance. And then also simultaneously to enhance its institutional relevance, contemporary relevance, and also future relevance, so the library continues to be a thriving institution in the community. While doing that, retain the property's historic character and preserve not only the overall big picture ideas, but some of the this distinctive elements, the parts and pieces, materials, finishes, features, construction techniques, and or examples of craftsmanship that are present. Then, as we think about the plans for expansion, as we do the addition, to craft these alterations and additions in a way that's going to be compatible with the character of the historic building and earlier additions. So those are our big picture goals. Some assurances I think that we can offer as we go forward based on the development the project already has is that assurance number one would be that the property will continue to be used as it was historically. It'll continue to be the Fitchburg Public Library. And I think it's actually, we don't have any options there. The property is deeded that way, but that is fundamental. Ornamental and decorative detailing that's removed will be repaired and reinstalled. There are various pieces and parts of the existing buildings that will be probably located in different places sometimes later, sometimes in the same place, but removed and replaced after having been repaired and then reinstalled. So, and then aspects of the new construction will be compatible with the architectural character of the existing building and also, its relationship with the other buildings in the historic district. And spaces in the district as well as buildings in the district. The size and shape of additions to the building will be of secondary importance to the historic building and compatible with the building components removed. I don't know if you know Keith and others, but for about a decade I taught a course at the Boston Society of Architects get-together on, the course is about preserving significant architecture while expanding it. And I think the course was called, I don't remember the name, but one of the tenets that we recognized was present in the Secretary of Interior's standards for the renovation and restoration of historic properties was this notion of the historic building is preeminent and the addition that comes to it should be subordinate, really subordinate in many ways to the design of the original. It's one of the unstated, but nevertheless, it seems to be a present theme with the Secretary of Interior standards, which we recognize as being significant and important in this project. Then, last one on this page is that the HVAC equipment will be arranged so that it's concealed from view. Other assurances that where we need to make new openings on principal facades, as may be required for code compliances, we'll do that in a way that is unobtrusive. And then, except for thermal performance upgrades needed to conform to the energy performance codes, traditional buildings will be used, traditional building materials will be used for the existing buildings. Replacement windows, where required, will be conformed in a design way to recreate the configuration of the existing windows, except where we have to integrate new components for structural reasons. And then where we need to obscure some window divisions, we'll use the same techniques used by the original architect of the Wallace Building. I call it the Wallace Building. Of course, this is the Wallace Library. The composition of buildings on the site, which no longer includes this one, include the Youth Library from 1949 and the building on Main Street, which I'm going to be calling the Wallace Building, is from 1967. So this is the building that had been there as part of a theme that we're going to build on as we continue the history of the site, is to take advantage of artifact from that building that has been moved over to the 1967 Wallace Building, the stained glass seal of the city, which in this photograph from the late 60s, you can see in the roof monitor clear story windows there, and in an image from just the other day, you see it in place there. This is a technique that we will be embracing, this notion of carrying over pieces from elements that are to be removed, building elements being removed, but finding elements, components of those removals that merit preservation and reinstallation. So I'm just going to do a quick look at the building parts through some historical photographs. This is an image of the 1949 Youth Library. Shortly after it was constructed, you can still see in the background the Wallace Library and Art Building. And if I go forward a couple slides, we'll see this from another angle, another view of the Youth Library. We see some of the prominent characteristics here being the the zigzag sawtooth roof monitors getting daylight into the interior, the ornamental frieze, enameled metal panels here that are hand painted by remarkable artists of the period, and the overall just composition here. One of the things we're seeing here that we won't see if we look at the existing building, and here's a color photograph a little bit later, it shows this as well. There's a piece of the building shown here rendered in glass that is not familiar to most users of the library because that piece has been converted into masonry. So a glass component of the building was changed over to be a combination of windows and masonry, and you can see there are some differences, probably unintentional, where we see the mortar color not quite being the same on the brickwork. And also, it seems the datum line of the horizontal windowsill is not consistent. And other aspects of the fatter mullions, I would say, in here seem like elements that don't resonate perfectly well with the architecture of the original. So I think it's distinctive, perhaps in some unintentional ways, but we can tell that it was a later modification. Then working our way around the building, we see what I would call the link between the Wallace Building on the right and the Youth Library on the left. The link was part of the construction of the Wallace Building. And you can see recreates some components that are present on the Youth Library. The enameled metal panel frieze is added in 1967. It is not a piece of the 1949 construction. And then just looking at the Wallace Building from the intersection of Main Street and Newton Place, we really get a sense of the compositional development that this building embodies. I think that this is, both buildings were designed by Carl Koch. Obviously, the 49 is a much earlier work, and the 67 a much later work, and you can really see the sort of maturity of the architect and their design approaches. And the adjectives at the bottom, the simplicity and clarity, is one way I would characterize the design of the Wallace Building, but also it's full of nuance and sophistication at the same time. So it's really quite a remarkable and relatively unique type of construction. There aren't a lot of elements like this, certainly in Fitchburg and throughout New England, of these sort of mushroom column structural design, which is, so much of the architectural expression. The structure really is the architecture, a very sort of minimalist way of putting a building together that had evolved to, this building we see today. The image on the below is also on Main Street, and we see the bookmobile garage, which is no longer really a necessary function for the library. So I'm just going to go through now a series of diagrams to get sort of a understanding of the massing on site. They're overlaid on an axonometric projection of the building survey, the site survey. And the mass that we see here is the original Wallace Library and Art Building, which was expanded with the Youth Library. The Youth Library really is the front part, and I think the teen room originally was sort of in the middle. Now it's more of a conference room in terms of its use today. And then the bar in the back is pretty much the auditorium component with a sloped seating arrangement in a small auditorium. Another piece of the library that is programmatically, well, it doesn't align programmatically with the needs of the library today. The sloped seat auditorium is not something that can be easily utilized for the functions of the library. So then, of course, the Wallace building, the original Wallace Library building, came down. This is, in a way, identifies a sort of precedent, a local historical precedent for removal of older buildings to accommodate new construction, meeting contemporary and future needs of the citizens. So the Wallace building got replaced with the modern Wallace building, and the outlines show all the new components, including the link and the bookmobile garage. Our current anticipation for the project going forward is that there will be some removals. The bookmobile garage, as serving a function no longer necessary, would be removed, and the linking element would be reconstructed, and the youth library also would be removed. So those components would be gone, and the Wallace building proper remains, and we begin to rebuild from there, rebuilding a new connector element, which will have floor levels that align with new additions as opposed to the existing one. And then the library the rest of the library building plan really begins to evolve as a response to the 2015 library building program, which identified all the needs for the immediate and distant future. So the first part that's added in here is a community conference room area to meet part of the meeting room needs that are being removed. The auditorium space being removed together with a large meeting room pavilion to fill out the rest of those needs. So we have groups of up to 150 accommodated in the large meeting room, and in the smaller component, then there's a community conference room and support services such as bathrooms and kitchenette, also a gallery connecting them as well. So that's part of the building being reproduced in a way or replaced with in an expanded version to meet contemporary needs. And then the youth pavilion itself coming at the back, and this is youth services, children's services in particular. Then underneath that, There's a basement taking advantage of the slope of the site, and the basement holds, library operations and other building services. So the building, as it emerges, is configured as a series of pavilions as a replacement for the functionality that was previously contained in the youth library piece being removed. And this is, a representation of the rough massing of that composition. This is the site plan, again, which I'm reorienting so that north is up. And here we see the building footprint outlined or shaded in blue, the existing, and then the new overlaid on top of it. And this is the landscape site materials plan, doing this overlay on, and we can just identify some sort of working from the outside in, some of the materials that will be part of the project, including the concrete unit pavers, which would be the purple elements. In the top photograph, some colored concrete pavement, which would be integrated in different areas around the library. And there's an illustration of permeable concrete unit pavers shown here as well. Currently, we have sort of value engineered them out of the project, but tomorrow we're meeting for a cost reconciliation meeting, and perhaps they'll make their way back into the project, so I have an image of that carrying forward here. I should have said before I began that I'm accompanied here today by a couple members of our design and engineering team. Amy Allen from Warner Larson, our landscape architect, is here, as is Paula McCain, project manager for Tappe Architects. In any case, I would say they may, I'm going to do pretty much all the presenting, but they may do some interjection as they see fit, just make corrections or interjections as necessary. So going forward, I just put the outline in blue here of the existing building, and I want to make a point of correction to the drawings you have on hand. You'll see that it says existing building, 36,000 square feet, but it also, that is actually just the Wallace building part. The existing building also has the 9,000 square feet of the youth library. So that overall is 45,000 square feet, and the expanded is 55 and change. Other elements to identify here in big picture way on the site plan, we have the basic approach to configure the addition, again, as subordinate in its compositional character to the existing Wallace building, which is highlighted. So the red line is the facade, the line of the facade of the Wallace building projected back. And we're keeping the mass of the expansion behind that line to emphasize the historic piece. Other elements, there's a sculpture in the courtyard, which will be removed and reinstalled pretty much in the same location. It might be elevationally different, but its general location will be the same. Looking forward into like a little closer detail on the courtyard plan. I shouldn't have clicked too many times. But there's also the piece of foundation remaining from the original Wallace Library and Art Building. And where that exists, we're going to have a walkway that more or less goes slightly over it so that you have a little bit more engaged experience with that piece of artifact that remains on the site. Other aspects of developing the courtyard, which is we consider one of the historic spaces of the library that we are going to renovate and maintain in the future composition, include these various pieces shown here, from wood decking to benches, and also screening elements to subdivide space within the courtyard. We have both children's courtyard space and also adult courtyard spaces, which are occupying a shared courtyard, so there's some screening elements to subdivide that a little bit. Now, moving into the plans, I just want to probably zoom in on a piece of the building first. Let's look first at the children's library part, the sort of rebuilt youth library. And one of the things we want to do is to strive to restore the original sense of spaciousness that this part of the library had. And you can see from the image on the black and white image on the left, shortly after opening, and then a more contemporary image on the right, since it has become much more crowded, serving an expanded population. Again, we have a black and white photograph above, and sort of the contemporary image below, showing a much more congested space. So, taking cues from this spatial characteristics, we're trying in the rebuilding of the youth library to recreate that purpose that was present when the youth library first opened, offering the youth of Fitchburg the opportunity to come to a place that was bright and open and had this sort of general sense of welcoming spaciousness. One of the other things we're doing in this part of the building, as well as using the round columns that are present in the historic building, the new construction will use round columns as well.
Hey, Jeff.
Also, yes.
Jeff, sorry. Before we get too far astray from the exterior, do you want to give the commission an opportunity to weigh in on exterior thoughts before we get deep into the building? If
Sure.
it's okay to continue, I'm happy to continue. I just thought maybe you'd take a drink and a break from talking, and if we wanted to address exterior, we can deal with that before we get deep into the building. It's at the pleasure of the commission.
I should have said, whenever the commission wants to interrupt, please feel free.
I guess they're happy to have you go.
And I do have much more to say about the exterior, but I'm beginning to segue it. I'll go inside and then emerge outside again at the end. So
I'm okay with you continuing on and complete your design thoughts, and then we can ask questions at that time. So,
okay. Nevertheless, if you feel inclined going forward to interrupt, please do. As we had mentioned sort of at the beginning, there is a tradition of carrying forward certain pieces of buildings into buildings that are no longer extant into replacement buildings. And here, like the stained glass was moved over, we see these owls that are currently on the Newton Place side of the library being brought into the interior of the building, much like that piece of exterior stained glass was brought over and put inside probably for greater preservation, certainly in this case for greater preservation of these elements, and they each have sort of a prominent location within the interior space. So it began to make sort of a connection to the history of the youth library. They look to the courtyard, also shown, in this part of the plan. Again, we see a photograph at the top here, the black and white, which shows you can kind of sort of see the foundation here. I think that the way we're bringing people past that foundation in a new approach will give a sort of enhanced awareness of what that is, and incorporating, like is shown here, this little brass sign plaque, some signage to explain what it is that's down there and why it's still present. And this is another piece of exterior art on the building, currently near the entrance to the youth library, which will be brought, I think, into the courtyard. We haven't defined every location for these artifacts to be relocated, but I think this one will wind up on the inside of the garden wall as part of the other sort of back entry experience. We have a back gate into the courtyard now, and this is a preliminary representation of using the gate as an opportunity to sort of brand the library and using that historic owl composition as part of the courtyard gates. Also, just behind the gates, if the clarity of the screen is good, you can see the sculpture of that tower sculpture rising beyond. Also, I would say the planting plan for the courtyard is one that will draw inspiration from the plantings that are there. There are also some memorial plantings, probably which will not survive, but would be replaced in kind with species, with the same species, so that there's some continuity in that way in the courtyard as well. Then again, looking to the sort of the overall, I guess the replacement building for the proposed removed youth library, these a series of pavilions, as we saw from that the aerial view of the youth library pavilion for the youth services in particular, the meeting room functions for the smaller meeting room and bathrooms, and then the large meeting room function here. Just focusing in on some of the parts to be salvaged and celebrated. I think the monument in the front of the Wallace Library, the Wallace building piece here, these panels, the intent is to remove the monument altogether and relocate them in the gallery space here where you see the little blue dotted line. So those panels will get relocated in that space. So if we look into that gallery, you can see them here next to the door to Children's. This view shows them a little bit more, less obliquely and more directly, but these would be the panels reinstalled in that gallery space, brought inside. Also, right up front, there is the display case with the signage for the Fitchburg Youth Library. That will be removed, restored, replaced, more or less in the location that it is now in front of the building. And here we see it shown in a rendering of the expanded youth library and renovated Wallace building. To go up to the Wallace building and looking inside a little bit, it is largely a renovation project, but it's also kind of an adaptive reuse as we configure the interior for contemporary services going forward. So there are the interior partitions will be largely removed and new partitions put in place to serve the functions and operations of the library going forward. But also there are two communicating stairs and a floor opening here. One is not shown where the dashed line is because it's intended to be removed and replaced more or less with two new egress stairs to allow code compliant egress from the building. That's the second supplemental stair and the floor opening that is now going to be accommodating patrons in seats is not seen as a desirable element in the operations of the library. So from the library, I guess from a library operations perspective, it's not an asset, it's a liability. So we're removing that while simultaneously restoring and maintaining the other open stair in that space. One of the other things we have to do relative to code compliance is work with the railings that are in the building. There's a note here about new railings will draw precedent from the railings in the Wallace building, pointing to exterior railings, but also interior. Those existing railings, we need to work with the spacing of pickets, which is too wide, and the height, which is too low for code compliance. We want to leave the railing in place and supplement it with a kind of an overlay of new pieces done in steel that would be bolted on. So here we see in red the old railing and then the new components added. So the composition in the end comes off about like this for a code compliant installation that sort of recognizes the historic artifact of the original railing. Some of the artifact we're not going to preserve in place and probably have to completely recreate, such as the wood paneling shown in this picture. There's a wall behind the service desk, which is roughly in this location, which we will recreate that wood paneling on. and then backing off to the overall upper floor plan. I'll zoom in on the Wallace part here. And there's this remarkable roof structure, which is really a unique character of the building with its undulating roof planes. And then there's also the way Carl Cook opted to have partitions inserted underneath that canopy meet the ceiling, which is, of course, the poured-in-place concrete structure of the roof. The underside of the roof deck is the ceiling below. And the technique where walls came up to door head height, and then all of the walls above that point were glass. And here we see a representation of that in one of the taller bays of the undulations inside. So it's great that that we have that that technique defined for us, and we're going to capitalize on that with all the partitions we put back in at this level. It's also wonderful that we have blueprints from the construction of this showing that bay and also a smaller bay here, and then taking a look at just one of the interior elevations from our evolving design development drawings. We see, how we're really following that design precedent with glass panels above opaque walls, using the same approach. Here are a handful of historic photographs from shortly after opening. You can tell it's quite historic by the number of card catalogs in here. A lot of drawers. Coming in at the lower level and looking up, and the middle photograph arriving at the second level with the stair that we're maintaining, and then being at the top and looking back across the floor opening. If I take this picture, and I think if I just overlay more or less sort of a contemporary one to show how it is in its current use from just a couple weeks ago, I think, and then show that compared to the renovated plans. This shows, from pretty much the same perspective, the incorporation of the extended railings to fill in the gaps and raise the height, and that continues, as you can just barely see, that also goes down the stairwell as well. Otherwise, you can see in here these light fixtures, which may seem just funky to us, but they are historic and original to the building. Are anticipating maintaining those fixtures in place, and also then at the back there we see a representation of the wood wall, and here are another from our documents showing how we're using this precedent to redevelop that character in the inside of the building. This view happens to be looking the top. The photograph is looking towards the local history room. That will become actually the teen library area, and that will be, again, that'll have this detailing, which is also in the rendering on the wall directly behind us. So there's this continuity from end to end, like there is in the existing building, of this paneling idea. And those are the exception to Carl Cook's rule that the solid walls don't go up to the ceiling, they transition to glass, except where they are the wood paneling. So. Also, you can sort of see in here these sconce lights. There's one just barely cut off from the rendering, and it's the one that's still in place up here. So those would be another aspect of the interior that we're going to be trying to save. Now I'm about to go to the outside. The second floor, there is no second floor, upper floor on the addition. Well, there is a basement, there is no second floor. If we're looking down at the roof, and I wanted to point out a couple of things that we'd like to do here. One is to reuse the metal panel frieze to remove, restore, and reinstall it where the blue dashed line is going around the youth pavilion proper. Also, there's a piece of it out here towards the front, which is sort of the piece that is sort of closest to the sidewalk and closest to where where this frieze currently is now, putting some of it there as well. So wrapping the youth library proper with it and putting a piece on the street to recall its original placement as well. And here we see it, in that original placement. The other thing we see here, of course, are these characteristic roof monitors, the owls, which we've proposed to move inside. The roof monitors with their standing seam metal roofing. This is sort of a character defining element, and we'll see these monitors finding their way onto the new parts of the building as well. Here we see one over the meeting room pavilion, just about in the same location as these, or as the historic ones. So now just looking at the elevations of the Wallace building and talking in more detail about our approach to the exterior. As Tony was mentioning earlier, there's a lot to talk about the exterior. This is the long elevation on Main Street, and in general, we're going to propose redoing the glazing system with a insulated glass system using aluminum instead of wood as the framing elements. So here's sort of before and after views. The goal is to recreate the system of divisions that Carl Koch used and adhere to that to the extent possible, again, except where structurally we need to do something a little bit differently. And you'll see in some details what that little difference is. But in general, the attitude is about respecting the history of the compositional elements while rearranging them just a little bit to take advantage of or to better reinforce the library's operations going forward. I'll get into that a little bit. It explains why we see sometimes there's a brick panel in the existing where we've used a glass panel, again, designed exactly to match Carl Koch's intentions instead. So let's take a look at a bay. Here we have our proposed drawing. On the underlay and the overlay in blue is that bay as shown in the original construction documents for the building. Again, we're trying to be faithful in terms of sort of the divisions and the dimensions. We are adding a vertical in the top panel that isn't shown typically in the bays of the Wallace building. It does show, there is an occasional element of it, but we're thinking that piece would be part of the composition going forward. Because it wasn't typical, what we were thinking to do with these elements we've had to add for structural reasons to divide up a large glass panel is to diminish its significance in the visual presentation by making it be black or charcoal, dark colored. This is a technique that Carl Koch used as well, because, as we see with the casement windows here painted out dark and the overall composition, which causes them to be, of diminished importance in the overall presentation of the facade. And so this is something we're carrying forward. Looking to a glassy bay now, again, the blueprint from the original drawing, a representation of how we're planning to recreate that or reinterpret it, and then an image of how it is on the building today. So again, we're looking at this very carefully, trying to really recognize the beautiful precedent and recreate it to the extent that we can. And so it comes together, kind of like this, but with replacement materials. As we look at color palette, begun to solicit samples, physical samples of these things so that we can compare with existing and perhaps not knowing exactly what the original color might have been. We've begun to make some initial selections in any case. We do know that the concrete concrete columns were not originally painted, so we're picking a color that would resonate with what the original palette might have been with exposed concrete. This is the opposite elevation, the courtyard side. The hatched area here shows where the link is coming across between the two parts of the building, between the Wallace Building and the Youth Library. There's not much we're changing about the composition of this here, except we're adding some windows in the basement. In the local history room, now located down there, we're going to punch some windows in the concrete foundation down there. So we're trying to match the original composition with all the components there. I should say that where the brick is currently, we're not planning on replacing the brick. We're just replacing the window system. Now, the short elevation on the west side of the building is where the bookmobile garage is. And since the functionality of that space is now obsolete, we're planning on having that piece of the building removed. And then there's a couple bays here that are where the garage attaches. And the design of those two bays will take us precedent from the design of the front two bays, which are sort of in front of where the garage is. And so we'll be recreating, that rhythm and pattern going back along where the bookmobile garage has been. On the opposite end, there's some change intended here, where we have these two glassy panels, glassy bays in between the two bays of masonry. The middle two bays are no longer going to be part of a two-story volume, infilling floor in that area, and putting library services below here, circulation services, back-of-house operations. So this will be library staff space down below, and some other functions up above from the PC lab and other things, but also including an egress stair here. So essentially what we'd like to do is take the design of this bay and apply it to these interstitial bays, and take the design of the glassy bay and apply it to the bay at the corner. So that would become a composition that looks like this. And as we mentioned earlier, there is an egress stair that is being added, and sort of the introductory slides I mentioned that we would like to make those doorways incorporated in primary facades as obscured as possible. And so this is the technique we're using here. There'd be no hardware on this door. It's only an egress door. There's no coming in. So we don't want to advertise it as entrance and have it blend to the extent possible with the brick panel. Part of the impetus here at the corner is to enhance the library experience and connect the library patrons with a little bit more with the street, and also connect with the great daylight and views that this particular spot in the building has to offer. Both levels, it's a seating area. There's the library sort of lounge seating down below, and up at the top is the library, quiet reading room. So two very different kinds of seating opportunities that really could take great advantage of the diagonal view across the intersection of Newton and Main Street to connect with the historic park that's just diagonally across that way, and take advantage of that as a way of not only getting north daylight into these spaces, but also getting an opportunity for a distant view when you are looking up from doing close focus work, which would enhance a library patron's experience in the building, and of course, I think also reconnect them with the historic landscape that's part of this part of downtown Fitchburg. So that's the reasoning behind wanting to make a change to the overall composition while still using elements of the existing composition and sort of deploying them in different locations around the facade. And if we look at, this is a sheet of elevations you have there of the addition. Again, I'll sort of zoom in on parts of it. we identify why the things we're doing to try and sort of reconnect the new with the history of the site. Part of it is recognizing the character of this part of the youth library. I mentioned earlier that this bay was not always like this. It had been brick and then had been glass and was changed to brick in a way that we're thinking of taking places that were glass and changing them to brick on the Wallace building. But in this case, we'd like to recall this glass panel with the new glass panel in more or less the same location in terms of the composition of the site. And that would be, again, we're thankful to have old construction documents. Here we see that glassy bay, and there's where we would begin to apply those proportions or of size, et cetera, as a way of recalling the sort of the evolution of the buildings on the site and represent that with the new construction. So it would come off looking about like this. Again, these views from comparable angles, not exactly the same, but this piece of glassy facade being recreated in a way, or reinterpreted, I should say there. Of course, the other thing we're seeing here is the reinstallation of the enameled metal panels on that piece of building that I spoke about earlier, and also the display case out front. Then there's the bricks. We've made a preliminary selection of bricks, trying to find not only exact matches to the existing brickwork, but also to find compatible matches at the same time. And so on the right is the closest thing we've found to date to a selection of bricks that would be able to recreate a wall such as this one on the Wallace building, and some other bricks we'd like to use in the composition. So I'll just identify how we plan to array the palette of bricks that we have in mind, starting with the bricks that would recreate the existing brickwork, acknowledging that we have to add in these clinkers into the overall composition. And it may be that if we can't find good clinkers that are new, then we may have to, as parts of the Wallace building, perhaps a bookmobile garage, are demolished. If we could save a couple hundred of the clinkers, that may be another way of getting them reinstalled and reincorporated into the brickwork. But we would plan on having that front piece with the new sort of window panel in it. That would be a place where we really want to match the brickwork of the Wallace building. So we see a panel on the Wallace, and we see this frontmost piece closest to the Wallace building, and being a place where we strive to match. The next piece over, we plan to match the palette, the color palette, pretty close, but in this case, tighten up the bricks and not have the clinkers. Use a little bit of a smoother brick in this piece of the building, a little bit more distant from the Wallace. And then on the youth library proper, which is a bit behind in the overall composition, use a larger brick of a consistent color and arrange that in a stack bond pattern in the back. When I talk about matching brick, on the front part, of course, we're going to match the bonding pattern here, which has kind of a modified Flemish bond with as part of that. That would be something we would match as well. Lastly, a darker colored brick, a sort of a medium gray, warm medium gray brick would become sort of the interstitial elements that fall to the background, allowing these other elements to be somewhat more prominent. And then, of course, the enameled metal panel on the front and also on the youth library beyond. And of course, there's also the, you can see multiple iterations of the roof monitor form that would be evident from Newton Place. Looking at the next elevation around, this is the south elevation facing Boulder. Again, we have our sort of tighter version of the historic brick on this piece. On the youth library, children's library proper, we have the more homogeneously colored, smoother, larger bricks. And then down below, where we want a piece of the building to recede, we have the darker colored brick. Going to the next spot. Oh, yes, then we have the green cornice and the skylights or the roof monitors. And then looking at the courtyard side of the youth library, the new children's library, using that same even colored larger brick in a stacked bond and putting the cornice of the enamel metal panel on top of that as well. Over at the entrance, oops, I clicked, go back. Over at the entrance piece, which happens in the link between the two buildings, we're using the aluminum storefront system similar to what is currently on the youth library at this entrance into its courtyard. So our courtyard doors will be similar to this courtyard door composition here, or in terms of materials, they'll have sliding doors instead of swinging. So that's sort of a comparison of the massing of the buildings. You can see this notion of the relatively large replacement piece for the youth library, configured as a series of pavilions to diminish its mass in general, and a strategy to make it slightly diminutive in the composition, celebrating the Wallace building up front. I'll just walk around the outside with a couple more images here, showing, of course, the current condition above, proposed arrangement below. Here we see the meeting room, the large meeting room pavilion in the foreground below, youth library, foreground above, the window to the street with the recalling the non-existent window that used to be here on the original youth library composition, coming up to the corner of Newton Place and Main Street. You can see how this has changed, but done so in a way that we feel respects the integrity of the design concept for the Wallace building here. And at the corner where the bookmobile garage is no longer, here we can see the replicated bays as we talked about earlier. And then this is taking a closer view at the entrance, new entrance, old entrance above. They were sort of relocating the entrance to be as part of the linking experience as opposed to coming into the youth library. And here's how we're planning on composing that. Also shown here is the elevator extension above the roof, which will be required. We think it's present, but hopefully not a disturbing element in the composition overall. So that's our review of our intents at this time, thinking about, again, continuing the history that the building has had from the original Wallace building to a replacement Wallace building, and now to a replacement youth library. So that is pretty much the presentation component. And now I can entertain questions you may have, or comments, suggestions about the presentation, also about any elements of the documents that are provided to explain the design. I didn't go page by page through the documents submitted, but tried to explain what the documents are about, through the context of the presentation. I hope that was comprehensive and clear.
Good. Obviously, a very, very complex building and a building program, and we laud the library and your architect for this very complex piece of addition and work, and, to serve the community for, I guess, the next 50 years or more. So this is it's a wonderful thing for the community. As a historical commission, it's our duty. The commission was founded in 1975 and adopted by City Council to both be a historical commission, to kind of, our duties are to protect the heritage of the city. And our second part of our duties is that we are the controlling body of the Monument Park Local Historic District, which includes about 11 buildings around Monument Park, and it includes the library, the youth library, the Fay Club, the carriage house behind Fay Club, which is Lucy's Barn, very, very close to this project. The Monument Park, Christ Church, the Armory, the brick building in front of the Armory, the old Historical Society, the current courthouse that was the old post office, the old courthouse building at the far end of Monument Park, and the building that was the YMCA building on Main Street, just to the east of Christ Church property. Recent fire there. So this is, and our duties are as kind of a charter through the Massachusetts governing body is we are to review any changes to the structures that are happening within the Monument Park Local Historic District. This is what the city has given us as our duty. And this includes any changes to it that are recommended, and certainly demolitions to buildings within it, and changes in exterior materials and things that are viewed by the public from a public way. So this is kind of obviously a major challenge for us to absorb everything that you're proposing. It's a massive project, so hopefully you'll have a little patience with us also as we try to go through the various pieces that you're proposing. At this point, do we have any members of the commission have any comments, general comments now, or comments about the presentation that Jeff has given us and the materials we've received so far?
Jeff, I'd like to say thank you. This is Megan Donahue. I'd like to say thank you for your comprehensive presentation. It was really well done. And I really appreciate the fact that you've carried on the history of the current iteration of the Wallace Building. And I think it really, the preservation of the brick and the owls and the mural and all that, it just really speaks to how much care you've taken into this building and preserving the history of the downtown and all that. So thank you.
Great. Ellen?
I hope you will allow me to reflect something that I was thinking of while I watched the wonderful presentation. And thank you so much to the architects for, as Megan beautifully described, allowing for the wonderful elements that someone like myself watched change over the years. But I had the privilege of meeting with Mr. George Wallace after the Civic Center was built. And I don't think he'd mind if I said this. He shared with me that when he decided to build the Civic Center, and introduce new architecture to the city. His deep hope was that this Wallace Civic Center would help the city of Fitchburg. I'll use the word change. I don't know if that was the word he used. That it was something very unique at the time, and there wasn't a Wallace Civic Center any place to be found. And I noticed I felt in the conversation that he felt that it didn't quite do that. But as I've listened to this presentation and remembering what Mr. Wallace said, I'd like to suggest that this magnificent project, this commitment to the library development will be the catalyst to bring our Main Street, to bring life to our Main Street. I think it's wonderful. I know there are details that we have to be concerned about, but the project itself is, I think, a wonderful opportunity for the city. And thank you.
Any other comments from commissioners?
Sure. Again, another thank you, Jeff, for your presentation. That was very well done. It's good to see how the new structure is going to come together. And good to see how you've maintained kind of the overall look and shape of the main library building there, while trying to incorporate some new materials. I had maybe a couple questions. You did mention something about new pavers. Is that going to be both outside and inside on the floor too?
That's a good observation. Yes, there would be new pavers outside in select areas, and you can see a little bit of here in the foreground of the Wallace building here underneath the overhanging roof. There's a different texture shown here. We're not sure exactly what the original composition was here, but we wanted to sort of respect the footprint of the library in the paving in some ways that doesn't seem to be there currently. So there would be a mix of different pavings to comprise that. And I don't know if our selections are final at this point in time. Certainly, I think that if you had some perspective on it that you wanted to share, you wanted us to consider, we'd be open to hearing that. But also you asked about paving inside. There are flagstone pavers that run through the lobby area in front of the service desk, the circulation services desk in the Wallace building now. Those pavers seem to match and in fact connect through to the youth library right now. So there's this element, this thread of continuity between the two parts of the building composition. So we have identified at this point for the flagstone pavers to be removed and for polished concrete to be put in their place on the inside of the library. Partly because as we remove the service desk, we will see some places in the floor where there are gaps in this system, and we need to infill that in some ways. And the flagstone is not a great floor surface with its texture for library operations. Book trucks rolling across this floor make a ruckus, and it's hard on the trucks, and it's hard on the patrons, and it's hard on the books. So there is that. Now, there are also flagstone pavers in the courtyard, and in that case, we're thinking of replacing the flagstone pavers out there with something a little bit more regular, but still the same material, and a little bit more regular geometry as well. So it wouldn't have so much rough texture and probably more rectangular geometry. One of the things that we're wondering about in terms of the inside is, could the floor be ground smooth? More or less like taking a terrazzo grinder in after terrazzo has been placed, which is all rough textured, and then grinding it smooth. Could that be done and in that way preserve some of the original material? So we're looking at that. We haven't, we've just begun exploring a notion of preserving that piece of flooring, mainly because it was a gesture that the 1967 building made to the 1949 building. And it seems that in some way would be useful to either maintain or recall or something, to recognize that it happened, I think would be a nice thing to be able to do. And we don't know exactly how to do it right now, I would say.
It's interesting.
Okay. Yeah, it just seems like it's a feature you notice when you first walk in the building. Anyways, to me. Also, just wanted to ask about the main entrance. Is that changing in any way, or that's going to look about the same? I know the big monument piece is moving. Oh.
Right. It will look about the same. The monument piece won't be there, and the existing entrance is not in the center of that 2-bay-Y aperture that we see here with where the missing column isn't located. The entrance isn't centered. It's off to one side. And we're going to keep it off to one side, but in fact, we're moving it to the other side of offside. But the composition from the outside will look remarkably similar to what it is now. And then you won't have the awkward experience of coming in, it's sort of coming in on the left and having to go to the right to continue forward to get in. We're just going to line them up and push it off all to one side. The other aspect of entrance, other than the monument that won't be there, is that the book drops won't be there either. Instead of that, we're actually anticipating having book lockers in that place. You can sort of see there's a little gray box shown in here, which is sort of a place where a library patron can come up, much like an Amazon retrieval spot. You swipe your card and a door pops open and you take your books out after hours if the library is closed. It's a way of being able to sort of offer a kind of a curbside service at all hours. Anyhow, so that'll be another aspect of change at the entrance. Relative to book returns, just beyond this couple, with the woman with a red stripe on her back, just beyond them on the face of the wall of this building, there's a little horizontal slot which is put into the bottom of one of the tall window bays. That is the new book return. It'll be around that side. And on that side, we also have, I did fail to mention this when we were looking at site plan, but we are planning a series of parallel parking spots on Newton Place. And one of those spots will be a short stay, 5-minute drop off and pick up. So close to where you drop off and pick up, there'll be a book return incorporated into the face of the building at a spot that is the bottom of one of the existing window bays.
Okay, thanks. I just had a couple of quick general questions on the roof of the main building. Is that getting a new roof? Is that just a flat rubber roof up there?
Yes, it's not flat, but it is a rubber roof, and the existing roofscape is not flat. It has many peaks because of this unique roof geometry. It has many peaks that rise from it, and that will still be the case. We are going to remove the existing roofing material, whatever is up there, rubber roof, I suppose, and replace it with a similar material, while adding about 8 inches or more of insulation, rigid insulation on top. Now, you'll see in some of the details we provided that we are not going to increase the depth of the fascia along here. We're going to taper the insulation as it goes out over that 8-foot cantilever out over the sidewalk, so that the thickness of insulation will just, well, get increasingly thick as it goes back towards the actual enclosed part of the building where the insulation is needed. So that'll be our basic approach, is to keep that roof thickness like what we see today, keep it thin at the edge and make it thick where we need the added insulation value to sort of meet the energy code. And, you know, Fitchburg is a green community, so not only do we comply with the energy code, we need to comply with the enhanced version of that, the stretch code, for, you know, elevated building energy performance.
And lastly, are all the windows being replaced on the main building, so it's all new energy efficient glass?
That's exactly right. What we're proposing here is all new glass and also all new frames, removing the existing wood storefront or curtain wall system and replacing it with an aluminum one to, you know, recall as closely as possible the configuration of that system.
Okay. Thank you. All set, Keith.
Sam, do you have any comments?
Sam fell off the call.
Okay, thank you. Maybe follow up on Andy's question. I think you're maybe researching the thought of grinding the flagstone down to a smooth surface and kind of resealing it might be a unique way of kind of preserving that element of the kind of the main entry area. So that would be great if something like that could be done to save those portions of the interior which are kind of publicly accessed also. On the other question that Andy had about the pavers, particularly on Main Street under the front overhang there and the public sidewalks, maybe if your design team could kind of take a look at the sidewalks all around Monument Park area. There was a concerted effort to have brick pavers interspersed with some concrete, and I believe currently in front of the library there are elements of those same brick pavers adjacent to the building in various panels. And rather than, our suggestion, rather than replacing those with a colored concrete or some other pieces, or even solid concrete, that we try to maintain and perhaps even enhance that as the opportunity might present, and matching the brick pavers that we see on the sidewalks around Monument Park and other areas. This is an opportune time, rather than taking them out and just putting in something else. It's kind of an important element of a lot of Main Street detailing that kind of goes up and down, but particularly around Monument Park. And that would be, in our opinion, I think would be great if we could save that and replicate it somewhat to continue that theme.
Okay, well, Amy, I think we'll look carefully at the precedent that's out there, and with Amy being with Warner Larson Landscape Architects, and look to see how that can become incorporated into the design of the sidewalk, especially along Main Street, and maybe at the other entrance area as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think we can try to replicate some of that. I think potentially there could also be an opportunity to reuse some of those bricks. So yeah, we can take a look at that.
Great. That would be good. And it may be even going down Newton Place, if there's a choice of materials on the outside landscaping, it may be a consideration unless you have other reasons to change it. But when you have pavers, particularly along the public way that's, really part of the historic district, that would be great
That would be wonderful.
to consider that.
It's okay.
Sure, Ellen?
I'm not sure. I wanted to write down how you described the additions to the roof line of the youth library. And I can see one of the structures. Will there be more than one? There were 3 now.
Right. There are 3 now, and there will be 4 altogether.
Oh, that's
when
wonderful.
We're done. There will be, the one you're seeing right there is one of a pair that are located over this subdividable big meeting room. So each half of that meeting room gets a monitor skylight like this. And,
Yes.
And then there's another one over the gallery space, which is the corridor, a pretty wide corridor that has the monument pieces from the monument out in front of the building. Yeah, we want to bring some daylight into that corridor, so it too has a monitor skylight. And then, of course, the Children's Library proper, it has a monitor skylight more or less centered in the space. So when people walk in, they will say, "Oh yes, this feels like the youth library I know," because it has one of those monitor skylights as well.
Thank you.
And I think to address the concern of the children's librarians, we're detailing them in ways that probably weren't familiar to Carl Koch in 1949, so that they will be actually weather-tight and waterproof.
Those have been a problem, yes. I have some kind of general comments and then maybe some specific comments of things that I think we as a commission need to have a concern with, and I think perhaps with your funding coming, it'll probably be reviewed also by Mass Historical before your funding is released. So I think the major piece or pieces of this project are demolitions of buildings or portions of the library complex as it is now. Starting with the oldest, the proposal is to remove the 1947 designed and I think dedicated in 1950, the youth library that was originally an appendage to the Rodney Wallace classical revival building of 1885 and its then connection to that older building. It is in many ways one of the few remaining 1940s, 1950s pieces of modern architecture of that particular period. Modern architecture had kind of went through many kind of iterations as it's kind of gone through. It's different styles, and certainly the 1967 version is much different from that and kind of reflects new technology and reinforced concrete and, almost the beginning of brutalist architecture, but I don't believe this is brutalist. This is so light and airy and delicate, if you will, that it's kind of its own magic piece, if you will, in the 1967 version. But getting back to the complete removal of this, the 1950s youth library, and kind of the history that it had as being, I think, the first separate youth library building in the United States. There had been youth sections in libraries before that, and I think maybe Fitchburg was one of the first libraries that had youth sections in it. So our community historically has been on the vanguard of things to come. And in some ways, the separate youth library with kind of all of its features, although there you are, 60 some years old now, almost 70 years old, 72 years old now. Yeah. And it has some leaks and so forth, as many modern type of buildings have had, that kind of getting through the ages. But I think a concern for our commission is to really double check the ability to actually retain parts or portions of this, which include the youth library, its meeting rooms, its very unique outside courtyard that's kind of an inside-outside space for the youth library, with this double-sided fireplace and kind of reading around the fireplace corners, if you will. The kind of glass-faced meeting room that was kind of a children's and community room space that's at the, say, the north end of that area. And the auditorium, which was a slope seating auditorium with stage and et cetera at the kind of far end of it. All three of these elements, and probably the original connector also, were significant pieces of architecture from that era. And we as a commission to consider, for your project and for the use of the library, and I think the state will also be taking a double look at this. We need to justify, or you need to justify to us maybe a little bit more of why it has to be removed, and what are the alternatives to keeping all of it or portions of it and reusing them. Green architecture is about reusing our existing buildings, and demolition and going to landfills, et cetera, is obviously part of it also. So kind of different ways of looking at it, but our commission is looking at, do we really need to tear this down? Can it be reused, perhaps not part of the children's library, but having the presence of that structure along Newton Place. In the recent site plans that you provided us, Jeff, that shows the outline of the old structure over top of the new proposed structure, it's kind of this nice fancy colored one. We can see that the new portion that's replacing the youth library anyhow appears to be set back about 20 feet from the face of what the current facade is. And there's a lot of green space, and it's obviously recessed for some parking in there too. More than half of that building is kind of gone there. And I'm wondering if there are ways of kind of repurposing that space. In some ways, it's about the size of some of the meeting rooms, that are public meeting room spaces that you are proposing, understanding that it's at a different level than the main library, and it would be difficult to put a basement under it because of getting any light in there, and the flood zone area that the building is in, which would be probably, it would be certainly difficult to get underneath there, but I see in your lower level plan, or your proposed, the basement area does not go underneath the complete new addition, particularly under the proposed new children's wing area. So I think, just kind of volume-wise, the new proposal looks like you're adding about 20,000 square feet of usable space from what I see. I think the existing building was roughly 60 or 36,000 square feet. And the proposed renovation and expanded building is about just a little bit less than 56,000 square feet. So that's about 20,000 feet of new space that you're including. Is it, and this is just my wondering, but is it possible for us to say, you know, what is, you know, what have you tried to do to keep the existing building? And I think we as a commission need to ask this. And in this presentation, we don't have that information, and you may have gone through this already. But I think it would be an important part for us to see. This is a demolition of youth library, the outside courtyard space, the auditorium, and the bookmobile are kind of the demolitions that you are proposing now. And these are major things that we need to understand kind of fully before, I personally think anyhow, that before we could make a ruling on this, and before we can kind of convince the State Historical Commission that, you know, we've done our due diligence, and we've all done our due diligence not to remove these structures without kind of thorough understanding of it. It'll be a different feel to it. You've made many good attempts to save the fascia, to save the owls, to recreate the roof monitor feelings of it. But it's not quite the same. That on-grade entry into the Newton Place entry is kind of one of the most welcoming types of entrances into a building there kind of can be. You just walk right in. Understanding that it's several feet different elevation from the main library, and there's the long ramp that goes up through the connector now. Is there a way of having both? You know, can we save the youth library? At least in my opinion, the auditorium is probably most citizens in Fitchburg don't even know there's an auditorium back there anymore. It is kind of a classic auditorium of the period, but not useful. I'm not sure that structure could be reused or not, but again, you know, it's certainly not viewed from the public way as what our charter is, or our requirement is to changes to our historic district, particularly things that are seen from the public way. Bookmobile, I think there's probably decent justifications from it, although it's a wonderful little miniature of the other structure. It's probably seen its day, and perhaps could be justified for the removal of some parking spaces and adding it back in for the expanded program that the library must meet. And we understand those pieces of it also. So I think the demolition, we would like to see a little bit more either history of or concerted effort in schemes that would save it. I think it's quite possible that this, you know, it is, I don't know how many square feet that particular addition is. It's maybe, I don't know, 35 by 60 or 70 or something like that, but that's 10,000 square feet or something. That's part of the building that doesn't need to be, one, demolished and removed, and secondly, rebuilt as additional type of space. Obviously, have to work around it. Any remnants of outside space for, you're including that for the children's library up into the common courtyard space, although it being kind of tight and small and maybe, but a gesture toward that. But are there ways of doing that, gaining the missing basement space you would have under that and including it under the far west end of the youth library if you need that for processing and storage, et cetera? So maybe there is some, by some creative design, maybe allowing that to happen, perhaps saving particularly the Newton Place structure, and perhaps some courtyard space if possible. And the features of that building, there is a flagstone strip that we looked at, I think, last week when we did a little tour of it also, that runs down the youth library. It's probably 10 feet deep and goes down past the fireplace. That there's an outside courtyard fireplace on the opposite side. Some pieces, again, maybe that could be polished and included in something like that if that's feasible. So I think that is kind of a major piece in my mind that we have question on, and maybe continuing the hearing so that we could get some additional information if we agree on that as a commission. Some other pieces of the piece that I'm concerned with, in that this is looking at the 1967 main library building on Main Street. The exterior windows, which are clearly stated in our Monument Park rules and regulations or design guidelines, that windows should be repaired and replaced, or replaced in kind if necessary, and not removed and replaced with something else. I understand the energy issues with it, and the windows on the 67 Carl Koch design building are a combination of wood dividers built around some steel framing in it for extra strength. A lot of the fixed glass, like we can see in what in the trade is called storefront, which are these aluminum pieces and large pieces of glass. The storefront is actually wooden profiles that have glass that's set in with wooden stops in it. It's all single pane now. But is it possible to review removing the single pane glass, replacing all those panes with the exact same size, but making it insulated, double insulated glass, with all of its refined, engineered, or technical coatings and things to make it more efficient, and reapply a smaller wood stop on that to fit it into the existing system. Therefore, maintaining the profile exactly rather than the rectangular sections that we have on the more, we see Lumen storefront and we know what it is. And for the purpose of maintaining the fenestration, the framing of the windows, the type of windows they are, that why isn't it possible just to replace the glass with energy efficient glass where needed? And where you're making glass panels, which used to be mainly brick panels, like on the northeast corner facing the park, replicate the wood system in those particular areas to match. It's an important part of our design guidelines, and I think we should see an effort to do that also. It will keep the building looking like it is. Again, this is a one-of-a-kind building that we have. It is architecture from the 1960s, even almost unique in Massachusetts for what it is. It's a wonderful building example. And to make the major changeover of all the glazing systems in it, I think would certainly deplete from the original design intent. And it seems like it could be possible just to reglaze where necessary. The existing casement windows that are in the scattered about in certain parts of the building are steel casement windows, again from that period. I think exploring versions of, there are replacement steel casement windows that do meet the same energy frames as the aluminum storefronts do. There are thermal breaks in them, et cetera. That could be energy saving, but still kind of maintain the same profile as what's in the original building, which creates a scale to the building by removing those pairs of casement windows and replacing them with solid glass. Tends to change the scale of the existing architecture that we are required to take a look at, and it's part of our design guidelines. So it's just kind of another thing. I think we would like to see some information on that. Could actually be the same cost or even less cost because you're not removing whole systems, throwing it away. You're just taking off stops, replacing glass for glass, and replacing it, obviously repainting it when you're done. I'm wondering, I think, Sharon, you had copies of the original blueprints of the building, and I think, Jeff, you have those also. Wondering if it would be possible for us to get a digital copy of those, if you have that, just so we could kind of compare. You've included in a lot of your presentations and little vignettes of it. It might be useful for us as we're reviewing it some more to take a look at it. Let's see. I don't know if it's possible to have images of your current slideshow that we could have on record as part of your filing for tonight's. I think there are some new images that you have included in that, and if that's something we could have a copy of also.
Digital copy is, of course, pretty easy to provide. I wonder if you're speaking of print copy as well of the presentation.
That could help, and we could keep them here, and people could, the public could visit that also. Thank you.
Yeah, the print doesn't read as well as, where there's animations and such, but it's possible.
Yep, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just kind of for the record that we can follow up on that. Just some random comments, and I'm not sure, this might be a little bit kind of planning board-ish, but as we are looking at views from public ways, just looking at your site plan you have on the screen now, we have new public parking along the west side or the Fay Club side of the building. It kind of tapers in, if you will, becoming, rather than single loaded, becomes a couple parallel parking spaces at the back end of it. One thought is that you have a parking space. This is where the bookmobile used to be up on Main Street. There's one parking space that's right adjacent to the sidewalk, and right at the corner of the building. I'm personally wondering if we could eliminate at least that space, and that could become a little bit of more of kind of a landscape space instead of having a car that close to the sidewalk, if you will, where people are, and kind of almost obstructing that corner of the building, and making that more of a landscape island off of the sidewalk area there for at least one or two spaces. Assuming the bookmobile addition is gone there. You know, in that area there, it just seems, particularly with, we are concerned about how your architecture affects the neighbors also. That is the, you know, the Glorious Fay Club building to the west of the building there with its own architecture. All of its parking is to the rear, and adding this into their front yard, if you will, is, you know, can we give a little consideration on that, at least one space or two. Understanding that it would be great to pull off Main Street and park there and go into the library, either through the courtyard. Yes.
Hi, Mike O'Hara with the Community Development. I heard you say it might be a planning board issue. Actually, Jeff and his team did do a preliminary presentation, I think at the October 20th meeting. It wasn't public hearing, just kind of an introduce to the library renovation project. His team will come back for a full site plan review when they're ready to submit. And that's certainly one of the things that planning board is charged with, you know, with appropriate use of the parking, and landscaping. So I know they already took a number of comments back from that preliminary meeting. We'll come back with more final plans.
Good. Thank you, Mike. And as I mentioned before about rethinking the back addition and trying to save at least the youth library wing, and as we look at the way the proposed youth library piece to the west side of the addition, it's actually seeing how it's been held off from the Newton Place by about 20 feet. The whole addition is kind of pushed over about, I'm saying 20 feet, and it actually pushes the addition closer to the Fay Club, and very close to what is called Lucy's Barn, which is the carriage house for the original Fay Club, and having your new addition within almost a hand's reach or arm's reach of the Lucy's Barn. It isn't shown there, and I think we'd like to see the site plan that includes perhaps the Fay Club driveway, and particularly Lucy's Barn, the old carriage house that's in that back lower left corner as your plan is showing it right now. The choice of materials, the color of those materials, the type brick and fascia and things, as it's within Lucy's Barn kind of extends over right on that bottom property line where there's some a tree or something planted there, and that tree will actually be touching Lucy's Barn in that little jog, the middle of the lower middle of the left-hand side of the drawing. So we're within, you know, a few feet of Lucy's Barn there. One, if that addition could be, one, we'd like to really see a comparison of the materials between those two structures and how that affects, which is now the playhouse in progress. A very important civic piece of architecture in our district and for the city. And in the redesign, if it's possible to pull that addition back to the left a little bit, or back to the right a little bit, toward Newton Place, that might give you several more full parking places instead of the parking area narrowing down so tightly there. You could perhaps gain some, a few more parking spaces, certainly to make up from the one or two you'd miss on the corner of Main Street. Just a thought, and if we could see some modeling, or at least on the site plan, showing the adjacent Lucy's Barn building there on the far lower left-hand corner, so we could all see the relationship, and you could be conscious of your design as it is adjacent to this other piece of historic architecture. I think as you kind of go forward, I think that and this is the kind of early stages, but recognizing it in our comments, the mortar selection makes a really big difference on your brick selections for your various pieces. So being able to understand the mortar brick color kind of combinations as you go forward. And this is something that could be certainly deeper along in your construction document type of phase, but having some purview of the commission just to perhaps review that after you've gotten the go-ahead. The main entry area, which is kind of that double bay recess over on Main Street, in some ways, the Wallace tomb or cube that's out there with the commemorative plaques on it and the glass top to it gives that entrance some scale. Although it's been kind of a after-hours unpleasant piece to have there and hard to kind of police, it kind of does give that entry some scale. As you know, I see you're proposing to retain the enamel panels that run between the first and second floor in that recessed area there, and I think there'll be sliding, automatic sliding doors like you have currently in the library. Now on the far left side, almost behind where the old monument, or the monument currently is, it seems like it's going to be a large kind of cavity type of recess, and if the doors are, it doesn't seem to have any definition to the Main Street area that this is the entrance and you're welcome to the library type of piece. I'm just wondering if a little bit more thought in the welcomingness of this. I think in one of our lists that we had shared with you was, is there any signage on the library that you propose or starting to design into it now, that somebody driving down Main Street saying, what is this building? Oh, it's the public library. Is there any signage on Main Street side that so designates this? And it's, I think we would want to, by our charter, we'd want to be able to see that also. And whether that happens in the recess area there or whatever. But kind of somehow adding some scale besides the return book bins happening in there, that, the paving going into it, how it kind of defines it, and the, here's the door, and which one of these panels is, like you coming into this chamber here, you think you can kind of walk straight into it, and you hit a wall of dark glass coming into it, and you have to come around the sides. I think it might be similar kind of coming into that entry as it appears right now, and I'm sure you have some other good thoughts on how that design can enhance that. And I'm not quite sure what Coke's original entry looked like. They were probably swinging doors, and how they might have looked at the time. Talking about doors on the interior and kind of finishes on the interior, it's wonderful to see that you'll be saving or perhaps replicating a lot of the vertical wood paneling that happens, particularly near and behind the current circulation desk on the ground floor and on the second floor, areas in that kind of main public core area that are very distinctive of this period piece of architecture, and maintaining that in the public spaces of the interior of the library are important. Also, the doorways into the various rooms, particularly in the main sections of the library and the public areas, I believe are maybe a stained mahogany, and maybe even with wood trim around those. Kind of fitting in the themes with the wood handrail that goes around, et cetera, but the other wood objects that are wood finishes that are in the existing 67 version. Some thoughts on interior doors and frame material, rather being divergent from that, would be, I think, respectful to the architecture that's there. We mentioned location of heating and ventilating outside heat exchangers and things like that. Wondering, you're showing the elevator shaft coming up through the new proposed elevator shaft coming up through that's visible from Newton Place. Are there any other rooftop appliances, if you will, heat exchangers, fans, heating, cooling towers, things like that, that your mechanical engineer could give you information about at this stage of your design? I suspect there'll be things on the roof, and particularly things that would be visible from the sidewalk or public ways we would like to be aware of. And it's hard to know at this stage, and quite often they get added in at the last stage of designing, and they sometimes can be very obstructive in how they look. Don't know.
Yeah, I think we have them located, and they won't be visible from a public way from our explorations.
That's good. Thank you, John. Let's see. I think that's it with my comments. I'm wondering if the public, there are any comments that you have would like to make to us, those of here present and anyone that's on Zoom. Please identify yourselves, and we could be happy to have public comment.
Hello, I'm Sharon Bernard, 70 Sawmill Pond Road, Fitchburg, and former library director. And I just had a few comments. After much discussion over the past year while we were doing this design, we advanced it to this point because it best served the library's purpose and fit within the budget. We moved from a 3-story addition to this 2-story design, which lowers construction cost and eliminated the need for a second elevator, which also lowers annual operating costs associated with yearly inspection. Other building elements will create a more efficient space for energy consumption and overall traffic flow. As has been pointed out, this design will not duplicate the existing children's wing, but it will pay homage to it in a meaningful way. More importantly, it will provide the space needs for the youth of Fitchburg with an expanded children's room and a separate teen room, as Alice Wallace intended when she spearheaded the campaign to build the first youth library. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? The library, building committee, anybody on Zoom, online? Okay, nobody on Zoom for comments. Any other comments from commissioners? Any other comments, Megan?
No, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Pardon me.
Andy? I think really appreciate, again, the efforts that you've all put into this. We have some questions and maybe some refinements that we would like you to consider, and I'm wondering if it's possible, or if the design team and the owner would consider that we continue the hearing to another date at a time that allows you to maybe address some of these questions that we have, and we, with designs, arguments that might affect kind of this very important design decisions for this building. And again, we are trying to follow our charter of doing our duty to protect the existing architecture in this local historic district, which is the city has deemed a very important piece of the heritage and culture of our city. And we just want to make sure we're doing our due diligence, and that we are, trying to answer this as best we can, and just don't want to make mistakes that we're going to regret in the future, as we see with buildings that have been demolished or changed over time. So we're trying to do the best we can in the present to kind of understand these issues. So the library team and the design team, would you consider a continuance, that you could come back and maybe give some supplemental information for us? And is there a time frame that, if you do, that works for you?
Well, you have identified a good list of concerns from a very informed perspective about the history of the library and its integration into the context that we'd like to give some considered response to, and give some consideration to incorporating the comments you've made, provide some information about past explorations regarding saving more components of the existing architecture. And I think that some of the moves you suggest would take a little bit of design time to evaluate and test. Sometimes a thing that seems obvious and easy as an observation are more challenging to realize in a developed design. But we are game to make those explorations, but would like to make sure we do it in a way that gives you the best information possible. I think that that means we need several weeks of to make sure we cross all the i's and dot all the t's relative to your concerns. Unfortunately, there is the holiday coming up that might get in the way. If we could try and get it done for the holiday, that would be probably best, rather than have it slip over to post-Christmas and New Year's. That'd be my perspective on that.
We have a scheduled commission meeting for December 15th of this coming month at 3 p.m. That's one time, or we can change it to the next week. Christmas Eve holiday is on Saturday, the 24th. Anytime that week before.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess that the 15th might be tight, but if you're having a regular meeting, we could set that as a goal. We will know within a week or so whether or not that's possible, so you could have adequate notice if you need to establish a special meeting, I think.
Yes.
That sound right?
We can announce it tonight, and we don't have to make an official public notice on it. If it shifts, we'll need I think a 2-week notice to find a new time. So I'm happy to make it the week after the 15th. We can either move our meeting to that time, or we can have 2 meetings because we have other things to deliberate on too, so.
Okay.
So if you think it'd be too tight, if you wanted to move it, I'd prefer not a Tuesday, as one of our members cannot make it at this time on Tuesday.
Okay.
And if they can watch the video of this current meeting, they might be up to speed on being able to sit on as a voting member of the commission. So not a Tuesday would be good if you wanted to move it to the 19th, 21st, 22nd.
21st could, I believe, work for our team.
What day is that?
First day of winter.
Wednesday.
Yes.
Yes.
It is,
Celebrate the days getting longer.
yeah. Is 3 o'clock okay for the rest of the participants here?
I think the peanut gallery says yes.
Russ, do you think this is? Okay. So we will, so it will be either meeting here or there'll be a posted other location that we can go to at some other meeting room. So Wednesday, December 21st at 3 p.m. is what we're saying. So if I could have a motion from.
I move that we continue this meeting.
The hearing, yes?
Hearing, thank you, to Wednesday, December 21st at 3 p.m.
3 p.m. Do I have a second?
Second.
Megan, second? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Okay, I would declare this hearing continued until next month, December 21st at 3 p.m. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will go back to our Historical Commission meeting at this point.
Does Matt have a comment?
No, I was stepping to the microphone so that I could engage in any questions you may have for me as we were talking about schedule. In terms of the macro schedule, I just wanted to suggest that we allow for any time to address on the back end of that, the Mass Historical Commission's approvals process.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Sorry, is this better? I wanted to just make sure that you know, following, in doing our due diligence, we also are able to accommodate the time that would be required for the Mass Historical Commission's process on the back end of the local approval in
Yes.
advance of the beginning of the final deliverance of construction documents and bidding and the public process on that end as well.
Yeah. I'm thinking I'd like to informally get in contact with them just to, I don't know if your team has contacted them at all.
We have not. We understood that it was certainly best to engage with you at the local level before we did so.
And I'd just like to get a reading with the scope of work that you're presenting. I'd like to just pass it by them to get a feeling of where they stand on issues like that. Not that it's official, but you know, I don't want us to go through what we approve and then you just get you get a different picture from Mass Historical, and then we're all kind of doing this all over again. So.
Right. Now, did I hear you say that you would like to do that outreach?
I'll start that outreach, and you can feel free to do it also from your side if you'd like. Good. Any other things?
That was the extent of my comments, but thank you for the opportunity to present this evening.
Okay.
Appreciate your feedback.
All right. And I think, did we take a vote to continue?
We continue
We
this
did?
meeting, yes.
Okay. And do I have a motion to adjourn in this meeting? So moved. Ellen? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I declare this meeting over.